And the unrest is spreading across the country. Here in Al-Baidiyah, thousands gather near the main mosque, another city rocked by days of protests against the country's leadership. Chanting "There's no God but Allah," mourners carry the body of one of those killed. And there's more chaos. Anti-Gaddafi graffiti sprayed on walls, and a voice through a loudspeaker saying, "There's no state here." Reports of casualties are running high and constantly rising. The city's hospital overwhelmed. The morgue is filled with bodies, and more is still coming. On Libyan state television, the first signs that the country is in difficulty. Images of burning buildings, a result of the protests. They're blaming foreign forces for trying to destabilize the country. But while thousands of Libyans remain on the streets in various cities across the country, it's becoming harder and harder to ignore their calls. Stephanie Decker, Al-Jazeera.
I had a chance to talk to a man called Ahmed. He lives in Benghazi, and he said he could hear shots being fired close by.
And a lot of gun artillery and a lot of gunshots were heard. I cannot put you can hear it right now, but 5 minutes ago it was really loud and clear. And also on the south side, which is 3 kilometers south of the army barricade, which is the police academy, it's burning now. It's definitely burning, big black smoke coming out, and was loaded with army people and special forces. And hopefully, maybe within an hour, Benghazi will be in victory, and which I hope.
Well, European nations have been slow to comment on events in Libya. Many have, after all, spent years trying to build closer relationships with Gaddafi. Harry Smith explains.
Ever since Colonel Gaddafi was brought out of the diplomatic wilderness, Libya has become an increasingly important partner for Europe. On his first ever visit to Brussels in 2004, he was given the sort of ceremonial welcome which would have been unthinkable a few years before. Many of the European Union's 27 members are now big investors in Libya. You don't have to look far to see why Libya is an important trading partner for the European Union. It provides nearly 10% of its oil. It's now the third largest supplier behind Norway and Russia, and its importance is growing. Only recently it overtook Saudi Arabia for that third spot. It was the decision of the United Nations to lift sanctions against Gaddafi's government that started the European rush. The former colonial power Italy was among the first to normalise relations. Others soon followed, attracted by the prospect of oil from a supplier close to Europe. Libya has the largest reserves of oil in Africa, and its deposits are relatively cheap to exploit. The release by Britain of the Lockerbie bomber was a sign of the UK's willingness to foster good relations with Gaddafi, even though it risked damaging ties with the United States. But even Britain is now condemning Libyan actions.
The Foreign Secretary spoke today and said he was very concerned about the situation in Libya. We condemn the use of heavy weaponry against protesters. We're shocked by the reports of the number of deaths, 35 apparently at one hospital overnight. And we've had to say very clearly, just because the news media doesn't have full access to Libya, the eyes of the world are still upon the Libyan government and how it is responding to protest.
And as the crisis deepens, Europe is coming under increasing pressure to act. Harry Smith, Al-Jazeera.
Heard from Hillary Clinton as she's thrown her weight behind calls for political reform in Bahrain, saying that she deplored the use of violence against peaceful protests in the capital, Manama. Distraught medical staff who treated critically wounded protesters there tore down pictures of the Prime Minister, who is the uncle of the king, and shouted death to the Khalifa family. Well, James Bays is our man in Bahrain.
There seems to be a disconnect between the opposition politicians and the people. And let me tell you, David, when that opposition politician finished his interview and headed back down into the crowd, we followed him. And the crowd came up to him and said, "You're talking about dialogue. You keep talking about dialogue." He tried to explain himself. and they, the crowd around him, said, we don't want dialogue, we can't talk to these people after what has happened, we want the government removed and we want the king out of here. That's the sort of feelings that we're getting here, the strength of opinion you're getting among the ordinary people. Now, the opposition politicians are saying that what they want first is some sort of commitment from the government, from the ruling family, that they're serious about making concessions, that they're serious about talking about constitutional reform. They say they haven't had that yet, and that's why, although there's this offer of dialogue, no one's actually sat down to talk about anything yet.
The daughter of Iran's former president has apparently been arrested in Tehran for taking part in a banned opposition rally. Faizeh Rafsanjani is the daughter of Akbar Rafsanjani, who served as president between 1989 and 1997. And she stands accused of what they're calling provocative behaviour. There are opposition claims that police have fired tear gas at protesters. Opposition groups have urged their supporters to return to the streets to mark a week since the deaths of 2 people killed in anti-government protests. So to Gambar Naderi, journalist from Tehran, joins us on the phone. Tell us a little bit about the circumstances as portrayed on state television behind the arrest of the former president's daughter, I think, yeah.
Well, thank you for having me on your program. Well, this is not the first time that Rafsanjani's daughter has been arrested. After the presidential race and the unrest that took place later, she was arrested because of taking part in illegal demonstrations in the capital, Tehran, but later she was released. I think my understanding is that this time around will be the case. However, now the heat is up actually against the opposition groups, because what they are doing is they are trying to associate themselves with the rest of the developments in the region, and the government and the people don't like that, because the situation in Iran is unlike the situation in the Middle East. So if there is a voice for reform, if there is a call for reform, it has to take place within the framework of the law. Unfortunately, the protesters are not doing that.
But they are protesting peacefully, are they not?
Of course, you are right. They are protesting peacefully. But as I told you, they haven't got the permission from the Interior Ministry. At the same time, we've got terrorist groups in the capital. What they did last time, a couple of days ago, they shot and killed a couple of protesters on the street, and now everybody's blaming the government, and it is not fair at all, because the police did not shoot any protesters and the police did not kill any protesters.
How do you know that? How do you know it wasn't the police?
Of course, because the government is not stupid to kill people because of expressing their opinion. We don't do that. This is a democratic country. We don't do that. But unfortunately, when these kind of things happen, misunderstanding takes place, and the rest of the world blame the government and the police forces for the killing. And the government doesn't like to hear this kind of accusations.
No, I'm sure it doesn't. Gambar Naderi, thanks very much indeed. I'm sure it doesn't like to hear those sort of accusations. There have been anti-government protests too in Yemen outside Sanaa's university. More than 1,000 protesters confronted some 50 government supporters there, and shots are said to have been fired by both sides. Hashem Akhabara has more from the Yemeni capital.
A show of support for President Saleh. Loyalists waving flags and chanting slogans in praise for a man that is